Hi, we meet again. Today, I'm going to take on a timeless game that is Gran Turismo 4, only with cars that are powered by the mighty V8 engine. I'll be using the Spec II Mod instead of the original game. As of the why, I'll tell you later. And then, without further ado, into the world of Gran Turismo we go. I started out with 0 cars, 0 trophies, and a bank account with 5 zeros in it. I then, the responsible aspiring driver that I am, decided to take myself into the license center and get licensed first. Just for the B license, I went all out and achieved gold on all exams, including that dreadful graduation test. And Gran Turismo rewarded me with a Dodge Charger Super B, boasting over 400 horsepower, rear-wheel drive, an absolute beast of a vehicle. More importantly, it is powered by a V8 engine, specifically the 426 Hemi. By the way, only 22 of these had ever been produced. After handing the other 2 cars to a garage sale, I used the money to buy a Ford Taurus SHO. As for the why, you will see shortly. And now, with a rare, powerful car in my hands and a license to race, I went to the FR Challenge instead of the Sunday Cup, as this car is too expensive for the latter. Let me tell you, the amount of raw, unfiltered power this Charger has is insane. Unfortunately, it was not accompanied by high enough control. I started to wonder what could be done to fix this glaring yet typical problem. I missed my braking point going down the second corner, putting myself at the mercy of the boardwalk and let Infinity to reclaim his post. The third corner was unfortunately not better for yours truly either. I turned too early and rammed the guardrails. Meanwhile, the Crossfire was already making his rounds. On the straights, the 426 Hemi managed to power over the puny S2000. At the end of the long straights, I climbed to the silver medal with relative ease. The challenge then was the fleeting Chrysler, which in my opinion was quite defiant of all logic. See, the Crossfire only has half the power my Super B has. Sure, my car was half a ton heavier, but I still have the higher power to weight ratio, yet here he is keeping up with my Charger on the straights. However, after the 4th turn, I thought enough is enough. I tailed the Crossfire, pedal to the metal, and right before the sharp right, I managed to reach the Crossfire. He forced side to side throughout the sharp, unforgiving corners until I managed to carve out a decisive victory. After that came the only logical conclusion of challenging a muscle car with your underpowered coupe. That was that, the first victory of the run. Winning the FR Challenge had awarded me with a tiny, puny, weak Honda S800. Nope, get out! Now, remember the 4 Taurus I bought before entering the FR Challenge? Did you know that this is the only front-wheel drive car that is powered by a V8? Hence, the urgency of obtaining this car as soon as possible. In Hong Kong, the Ford's issues cleared, especially on the second lap, where the car just corrects itself back to going straight when I needed to make that 90-degree turn. At that point, the Taurus was completely stuck, so I cannot exactly tune the understeer out just yet. On the straights, I tailed the Fiat the best I could, to the point of mimicking his braking point, which did not exactly end well for my Taurus. I kept myself close, but until the second checkpoint, there seemed to be no progress. I still messed up where the Fiat messed up. I had had enough. On the final hairpin, I struck through the inside, forcing the Fiat to move out and give up the position. On the straights, the SHO's great power output made it virtually unchallenged by the rest of its peers in its challenge, granting me another victory. Winning the FF Challenge gave us this. On other teams this car might work, but for now, this thing is both worthless and useless. After that, I figured that it was time to tackle the Super B's weaknesses through small upgrades such as a flywheel, simple weight reduction, and sport suspension, as well as a set of soft sports tires. Oh, and a GT Auto wing for that 30 downforce. I also increased the camber angle on both sides to 1.4 for better turning radius. And if you had noticed, the GT wing on the Super B is, to be put in layman's terms, hideous. With such improvements, I believe it is time to take on an even field with like-minded individuals, the muscle car competition. Streaks, you might ask. Earlier, you said you added the GT Auto wing for the 30 downforce. Where is it? Well, my friend, it's called the invisible downforce glitch. By adjusting the downforce with the GT Auto Wing installed and then remove it, you get to keep the downforce while retaining the good looks of your car. The new upgrades had transformed the Super B into a grip machine. No more floaty handling, replaced with precise controls and insane acceleration. This was so effective, I managed to gap a Hemi Cuda by 12 whole seconds on the New York without adding a single horsepower to my car, turning what was supposed to be an even match to an absolute beatdown. Winning the muscle car competition allowed me access to the father of all Corvettes. While the most popular Corvettes are known to run on LS1 or LS2 engines, which are categorized as V8 engines, the same could not be said about the C1. It runs on the Chevrolet Stovebolt 235 engine, which is an inline-6 engine. Therefore, as per the challenge run's rules, unfortunately, there's no place for this car in my garage. I remembered the MR Cup was still out there, but with what car? The Super B's are rear-wheel drive, meanwhile the Taurus is a front-wheel drive. The MR Challenge obviously requires mid-engine cars, so Streaks, what are you going to use? Well friend, I did spot on a spree for 75k in the dealership, but my money was only 70k. I was only 5 grand short, and I forgot when the dealer would refresh its inventory. So, I got the extra cash from the Clubman Cup and pray that once I'm done with the fundraising part, the spree would still be there. And as luck would have it, it was. Trust me, this is much harder than it looks, especially since the spree's weakness was immediately shown in New York. With how each long straight lead to dangerously sharp corners, you'll need strong brakes here. Unfortunately, that is exactly what the spree lacked. On the straights, I overpowered both the MR2 and the Elise, and to the surprise of absolutely nobody, the NSX proved its dominance above the rest, as expected from the objectively best car. The NSX got even further on the series of 90-degree corners. For me, it was at that point where I learned to adapt to the spree's weak brakes, or so I thought. Right before the final hairpin, I braked too late, again, and crashed right onto the walls. I got myself back into the race and hunted the NSX down the long straights. I dueled the NSX throughout the series of sharp turns, playing with the throttle to keep the car's balance throughout the corner and not skip a beat. Once I was in front, I remained vigilant and kept striving to my utmost best as to not lose this lead. This time, I braked just in time to tackle the final hairpin, and after a mad dash towards the finish line, I scored victory. As for the next race, I spotted a man of culture driving an NSX. As a fellow NSX enjoyer myself, I went in to help us win. Out! Leave! Piss off! Nope! Winning the MR Challenge had awarded me a Toyota MR2, which I cannot use since it was missing 4 cylinders and was configured in the wrong way. Now, with truly nothing else to do given my license, it was time to claim both National A and International B license. This time, I only went for silver for both licenses out of 1. Personal standards, and 2. The Silverado, which was waiting for me at the end of National A license. When I arrived at National A's coffee break, I decided to take a look at the used car gallery for a TVR Griffith, as that is a convertible and powered by V8. Lucky for me, there was one sitting and waiting, so I immediately grabbed it and continued with my exams. Once I had attained my International B license, I went to Spiders and Roadster to test the Griffith. Attaining P2 here was easy. The real challenge came from the dominant white Elise. On the 7th corner, as I pushed the Griffith more, I detected a common yet critical weakness. Its turning radius is absolutely garbage. So, after learning about this problem, I took on the final lap with extra caution. On the 2nd corner, I slowed the car down extremely, just so you won't touch grass. Things did get better on the 3rd corner, where I had mostly adapted to the car's steering and managed to weave through rather smoothly. What was not smooth was how I misjudged the 4th corner, resulting in this unintended climb up the curb. This time, I carefully made my way through the 7th corner and managed to avoid sending the car off track. On the S's, however, I had to play it cautiously. The car's turning capacity was not the best. Meanwhile, for the lightweight, go-kart-like handling Elise, this section was practically home. We were engaged in a fierce duel down the twisty downhill, neck on neck, locked into an intense dogfight to determine which will come out from this race a winner. A classic struggle between speed and power against control and agility. While it seemed agility had won the day, I was not done yet. When we were on the hairpin, I took the opportunity to slot myself onto the better lane, denying the Elite's victory. I short-shifted to avoid wheel spin upon launching, and with the final straight, the Elites had no shot in making a comeback. The story ended with a satisfying last-minute triumph. As for the prize car, it's the Vauxhall. Quick, agile, and powered by an inline 4. At this point, we all know where this is going. And now, to close the lid on Beginner's League, the Sports Truck Challenge, the Silverado is considered the best pickup in the game. However, there was a bit of a problem. That's right, its color is not blue. And to make things worse, there is no way in the game to solve it. Therefore, I, Strix Racer, decided to take matters into my own two hands. Behold! Miracles beyond human comprehension! Try searching on YouTube. I dare you, I double dare you. You won't find a blue Chevrolet Silverado in Gran Turismo 4 anywhere else but on this very video. Out with the Nippon Poppy Red and in with the streaks transcendent blue! Anyways, in the actual event, I noticed the Silverado has much better handling than the TVR Griffith stock. I believe this is because the Silverado already has sports tires from the get-go. Meanwhile, the Griffith only had road tires. If anything, this showcased how sports tires are leagues above your daily road ones. With the sports truck race done and dusted, I bought the S4 and steamrolled the all-wheel drive challenge. That's it. I have officially ran out of events I could cover in the beginner's hall. Lightweight K-Car Cup, I didn't find anything that small that's powered by a V8. Super Wagon Series, the only V8 powered station wagon in the game is the RS6 Avant, which is the prize car for winning the event in the first place. The cylinder shootouts are obviously no-goes as well. Now I could move on to the professional hall. Not until I fix the Esprit's issues, while making it eligible for the Turbo Car Cup. On the track, I have to say, the Sports Softs, upgraded suspension, and a slight weight reduction pretty much did all that. The floaty handling's gone, replaced with precision and confidence, and the braking distance was finally up to standards. The Esprit had truly become a remarkable supercar. It yielded substantial results too, and just to kill some time, I handled the Hot Rod Challenge. For winning the Hot Rod Challenge, I was awarded with a Dodge Challenger, a classic muscle that… Wait, where are you going? That's my car, isn't it? Hey, come back! Oi! No, that's not your car. Really? Then what's my prize for winning that competition?
That's your car.
You can't be serious. Look at the state of that thing.
What do you mean? It's a Dodge Charger. Every kid's dream car. And fun.
It cannot even walk, let alone race. Hello! If that's how you wanna play, then what I need to do is obvious. Alright, with the Chargers practically rebuilt from the ground up, time to see it in action in the race of NA Sports. For this Charger, I used TeaKanji's tune, GT Auto Wing for the dirty downforce, camber angle at 1.4 for both sides, lowered the ride heights and reduced the shock absorber values. And just as important, the gearbox was readjusted, and to top it all off, the invisible downforce glitch, so it will still look great. For winning the race of NA Sport, Gran Turismo delivered me a Honda NSX. Normally, I'll be ecstatic to receive this car. I really want to keep this one so terribly bad. But the rules said no, and it compelled me. With a heavy heart, we must part ways, NSX. By the way, there's a brand new event added in Spec II featuring concept cars called the Concept Car Club. It has the prospects of challenging the Cadillac CN. which had never showed up even once during my run. Trust me, I tried. So, I'll just help another NSX driver to get second place, which didn't go exactly well at the end since I overshot the final corner and had to scum the NSX out from first place, leading to the NSX ending up in P3 after my little act of betrayal. Winning that event was easy, but it brought incredible cash, which I then used to upgrade the Charger to take on the Tuning Car Cup, arguably the hardest event of all the professional haul in the game, as the World Championship was moved to Extreme League, filled with cars from the tuning village, including Mugen, Nismo, Amuse, and many more. Excellent cars, armed with racing tires from the get-go. Some even has enough grip to rifle full-blown race cars. To deal with such formidable foes, I decided to give the Charger light upgrades, new racing chip, NAS system, polished the engine ports, and a set of racing mediums just in case. For the first round, I held myself from using the racing tires and instead stuck to soft spots, thinking these were enough to tackle the tuned cars. I dove deep, took on two cars at once on the chicane. I pushed the Charger as hard as I could, but the sports-grade tires could only go so much fighting these monsters. The Charger went too wide on the hairpin, allowing the R33 to temporarily fight back. While that fire was quickly extinguished, I sensed a greater danger in the couple of S2000s fleeting to the horizons. Not only that, at the end of the S's, I was being terribly outmaneuvered by the two Skylines, punting me back to 5th place. Only 3 laps, and at the end of lap 1, I was 6 seconds behind the Opera Performance S2000. Now, take note that the Opera Performance S2000 has one of the best handling in the game, a whooping 107 grip modifier on both front and rear tires, and is very light. The only thing holding its back was its power, which was only 270 horsepower. But do not let that fool you. As you can see, that absurd grip and weight was enough to have it be the single most dangerous opponent we have in this championship. First checkpoint, second lap, I was 7 seconds behind while struggling behind a Nismo. This time, I managed my way through the hairpin better, but it was still nowhere near enough to close the gap between me and the S2000s. In fact, on the second checkpoint, the gap became even worse, and the Nismo managed to form a comeback as I lagged behind in the S's. At the end of the second lap, I was back to P5. Now, losing to the Opera Performance was a given this time, but P5? No way! I ain't coming back from that. At the very least, it must be in the podium. I tailed the Nismo through the hairpin, and once the moment struck, I hit him with a well-executed slingshot. Sure, the Nismo made another comeback on the right-hander, and on the S's, I was once again kicked back to P5. But this time, I had enough. I relied on the Charger's power to tail the Nismo, slipstream it, and manage a slingshot maneuver just before the finish line, securing my spot on the podium. This was the first time in this run that I was truly and roughly beaten. That's it. No more half measures. I equipped the racing tires and got to the second round. With these tires, the Charger evolved from a mere road car with excellent handling to a homemade track weapon. The rest of the grid immediately became irrelevant as soon as I left turn 1. I chased down the white S2000 down to 300R, and on the do not curve, I struck. One chicane was all it took to reclaim my rightful spot. However, my fight did not stop there. Slipstream is a double-edged sword. If you're on the receiving end, you get a substantial boost in acceleration. But if you're the one on the giving end, the same applies to your enemies. I went in to defend myself, and as a result, the S2000 unintentionally gave me a speed boost. However, the true test was waiting on the first hairpin. I took the tighter lane and launched off faster than an insanely grippy S2000. On the 300R, I carefully went through the bend, avoiding the grass at all costs. I have absolutely no room for errors here, not when the Opera Performance was looming like the blade of Damocles. The new set of tires worked like magic. No more was I being bullied by the Opera Performance S2000. This time, I was an even match to this overpowered tune car. In the end, I managed to edge out a win by a strand of hair. However, that alone was not enough to reverse the losses I suffered from the first round. Predicting an RP1 for the Opera Performance, I must win the third round to reverse this. In Tokyo, speed mattered more due to the long straight sections present in the track. Like before, the rest of the grid was quickly brought to irrelevancy. Only this time, the green S2000 managed to hold. I tailed the hardtop to the subtle S's, the slipstream allowing me to perform a rather risky slingshot, And just like that, the green S2000 was dealt with. My true opponent, however, was still at large. Entering lap 2, the Opera Performance was confidently leading by at least 3 seconds, an absolute menace. On the second sector, I kept the Charger close to the curbs on the long right parabolic corner. I thought this was the optimal move, decent speed, shorter distance travel, but still, the Opera Performance remained unmatched. I also took the left-hander afterwards as fast as I could, but still, the Opera Performance remained in front. That's it. I'm deploying the nitrous. Huh? Where's the nitrous? What the? It's not working. What? What just happened? That was a P2 finish. The point gap grew once more. It turns out I bound the nitrous button to the R1 button, while I thought it was on the L1 button. This seemingly small mistake had dashed any hope I had on winning that Tokyo round. P1 nets you 10 points, P2 nets you 6 points. There was only one way that I could still save this tournament yet. I beat the Opera Performance in the last 2 rounds without fail. In El Capitan, the rest of the grid was dealt with immediately. On the first couple of corners, I closely tailed the Opera Performance to benefit from the slipstream. On the 7th corner, the difference between our cornering prowesses was shown, clear as day. This is why the Opera Performance had been so dominant throughout the tournament. But my progress is at stake here. I cannot allow this overpowered machine to bar me from progressing deeper into the challenge. And in the hairpin, I monopolized the inner lane and launched off the corners better than my rival. As a result, that's P1 in hand. While this was a joyous occasion, the fight was far from over, and both of us are perfectly aware of that. On the second checkpoint, I was not even half a second ahead. I approached the last few corners carefully, as the rather unstable nature of the track presents unseen dangers. I cannot risk the car flipping out and dash any hope I have left to win and progress. Just after I entered the second lap, I accidentally let my Charger to the stands on the right, a highly dangerous prospect. I was lucky that I managed to pull it out with no issue. Down the 5th corner, I remained highly focused and alerted, as the S2000 was right behind me. On the first checkpoint, I managed to distance myself a bit more, but still, one error and that's GG to the entire championship. I carefully went uphill on the 12th corner to prevent hitting the walls or spinning out. Like before, I put extra care on tackling the last few corners to avoid unwanted incidents, and by the 3rd lap, I was almost 2 seconds ahead of the S2000. Finally, some room to breathe. But that didn't mean I could let my guard down and relax. The S2000 was as fast as my Charger, if not faster, and right on. By the first checkpoint, the gap returned to barely above half a second. On the hairpin, I can hear the S2000's roar from behind, interfering my Charger's beautiful singing session. On the uphill 12th corner, I carefully made my way up, and even more carefully made my way down the twists. Finally, the last corner of the layout, I stuck deep, as close to the curbs as possible, and was on high alert all the way to the finish line, preventing the S2000 from making a comeback. I have won this round. Now, I was only 2 points behind the Opera Performance. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is it. The final round of the Tuning Car Cup. Realistically, this race is now between me and the Opera Performance S2000. If I can just finish ahead of that S2000, no matter where he might land, I win. I'm more than 10 points ahead of the P3 after all. However, if I were to finish second, while the Opera Performance finished first, that's it. I will have lost on the challenge. And looks like the Opera Performance is completely aware of this. He was already 4 seconds ahead. A terrifying prospect. Something has to be done about this. I fired the nitrous on the straights, and by the second lap, I managed to cut the distance by 2 seconds. Every time there's a bit of a straight line, I fired the nitrous. For now, it worked. I got closer and closer towards the Opera Performance. However, my nitrous capacity is limited. I've burned through at least 40% of them on the second lap alone. By the 3rd lap, I was barely a second behind the Opera Performance. I struck the deeper end of the 4th corner, but the grip provided by the racing tires pulled through flawlessly, and by the second checkpoint, I was ahead of my rival. On this lap, I decided to ease off the nitrous, as it is instrumental for emergencies. It was on the wide right-hander. I was skeptical and slower than necessary. By the final lap, I threw caution to the wind and just used the nitrous to produce a lap as fast as I could. On the 4th corner, I went as tight as possible and blasted off with ferocious speed in hopes to give myself some breathing room. But the Opera Performance refused to let up. On the final hairpin, I used what I learned from try-harding the National B license, kept my line short and blasted nitrous the second I knew the car was stable on the straights. I went a bit braver in the final corner, and then another nitrous-sponsored burst to the finish line. Finally, the final win for the Tuning Car Cup had been achieved. I saved the tournament. With grit, even the mighty Opera performance could be toppled. And for my troubles, Gran Turismo gave me a 400R. It's the Black Nismo I struggled against in round 1. And now, for the crowning jewel of an event for a run limited to only V8 engines, the All-American Cup. This time, I'll be racing against full-fledged race cars, Team Oreca Viper, Ford GTLM Spec II, and the mighty Chaparral 2J are more potential opponents. So, understanding the kind of titans I was going against, I gave the Charger a radical power increase through Stage 3 NA tuning, as well as a set of racing brakes. And so, armed with a heavily upgraded Charger, I charge into the fray filled with race cars. Just as I had predicted, the 2J is here. Oreca Viper? Present. And that Ford GT was there as well. Now I walked in here thinking the 2J would be my greatest rival, seeing how he is in 5th place. I don't bother qualifying, it would make more content winning from the back anyway. So, I overtook the 2J, the Viper was surprisingly easy, and the C5R stood no chance against me. What surprised me was how consistently ahead the Ford GT was. As I entered the second lap, the gap between us didn't change, still at 2 seconds. Thanks to my nitrous, I managed to cut that by half by the next checkpoint. Unfortunately, that was rather reckless as on the 9th corner, the car's excessive speed made a little skip. I was lucky this ugly incident didn't evolve into a full-on spin, but that was still quite a blow in my pursuit against the Ford. By the second checkpoint of the second lap, the gap had returned into 2 seconds. Should this dynamic continue, I would undoubtedly finish in 2nd place. This is something that I would rather avoid. On the 4th lap, I braked just in time to manage my way through the first hairpin. Then, on the uphill section, I controlled my throttle, minimized airtime to remain in control, and ensured the car kept to the racing line down the 4th corner. On turn 6, I waited until the 50-meter mark to brake and attempted a trail braking technique to handle that corner effectively. Not sure if I'm doing that right, but still, I was relatively close to the Ford GT. This time, I went through the subtly treacherous set of corners with conviction, preventing the car from randomly spinning out unlike the last time. And right after I was out from the corner jungle, I hit the nitrous until the 100-meter mark, where I slowed the car down just enough to handle the big chicane. At this point, I realized that no matter what I've done, the Ford GT will always outpace me on this track. So, to adhere towards an ancient wisdom, if you can't beat him, kill him. On the 5th lap, my rear tires were already dying, but thanks to the breathing room I've fought through untold acts of violence, I was able to relax the car a bit on the final lap and safely made my way towards the finish line with no drama. That was the first win in the books. Onto the next round, which was set on an even more terrifying venue, the Invinian Raceway. Surprisingly, the 2J was impotent in this round, easy to overtake, almost as easy as its sibling, the 2D. The incredible grip this Charger has allowed me to weave through the first section of the Invinian Raceway with relative ease. However, I was still in P4. I needed to do better if I were to score a win here as well. Meanwhile, the Ford GT had started to make rounds, signaling that I needed to make my move fast. On the S's, I showed the Viper absolute superiority, and not long after, the Corvette was dealt with. However, breaking up old rivalries was not the goal this time, it was beating the Ford GT. On the 3rd lap, my tires had been properly heated up. The Charger could perform optimally. I watched my speed as I went uphill on the 2nd corner, while I was careless on the 3rd corner, leading to a deep dive into the grass. I used this to slide into the 4th corner, turning crisis into opportunity. On the carousel, I made sure to hold my lane, and my crusade against this fast Ford GT continued down the S's, where proper throttle control, muscle memory, and car performance worked harmoniously to beat the trenches. All these efforts managed to bring me close towards the dastardly Ford, and on the 4th lap, I managed to tag the white Ford with a soft tap. Brief, but that's all it took. As a result, the Ford was launched to the grass and lost all momentum to prevent my rise. At long last, I have managed to make this Ford bend the proverbial knee. For the rest of the race, I held on, steadfast with my lead, tire life be damned, always one step ahead of the Ford behind me, and prevented any comeback without missing a beat. This level of performance yielded with a 2nd victory of the tournament. The next round was set in New York. While filled with sharp corners, there are also plenty of high-speed sections within the track. Depending on the car, this could become either a curse or a blessing. Upon launching, the long straights definitely showed the lack of speed my car has compared to the actual race cars. That means, in order to win, I have to outskill them all on the corners. It was on a 90-degree corner jungle I started to make moves. The 2J was first to fall victim to yours truly. Next was the sibling. My rise continued unchallenged until the brief straights leading to the roundabout. On the final straights of the lap, I burned some of my nitrous reserves to get the power I needed to beat the Oreca Viper, and more of them was used on the second straights to catch the Ford GT. On the corner festival, the Ford GT could not do much to escape me. While my rise was not exactly determinant on that section, I was head-to-head with the usually faster race machine, competing as equals towards the roundabout before us. Me, not wanting to take any advantage from that ruckus, decided to let the Ford go ahead. For now. I perfectly mimicked the Ford's movements to gain slipstream throughout the corner, and once we entered the long straights, I immediately attacked a quick slingshot maneuver against the Ford, and before he knew it, I had claimed the spot on the top. With how tight and narrow this layout is, there was not much room for the Ford to maneuver and lure over the rest of the grid, which had translated into easier time for me to shove him aside and attain yet another victory in the tournament. The fourth round was set in El Capitan. In my opinion, this is the scariest track of them all. So many uneven spaces, so many sudden jolts. Those could be detrimental towards my car's handling. As usual, the rest of the grid were easy pickings. Before I knew it, the silver medal was at hand. The real challenge, of course, was the Ford GT, and this time, the layout was in reverse, meaning no free wins on account of the opponents being too slow around a corner. Like before, the Ford was on my pace, but if we were to go at this pace forever, I would truly end up in second place. So, once I left the corners, I hit the nitrous. This managed to put me next to the Ford GT, but surviving the first corner took higher priority. No matter, as throughout the fourth corner onwards, instead of hopeless game of catch and mouse, there's an interesting, high-stakes dogfight between a highly tuned road car and a purebred race car. I pushed the car harder than I ever was, determined to win the skirmish. However, even with racing tires, the Charger still had limits that the Ford GT didn't seem to have. This extended the duel more. Both parties unwilling to let up, the Ford GT, motivated more than ever to win and hopefully score a comeback at the end of the day, performed even harder than before on this terrifying mountain track. On the other side of the ring, there's me. While I was staggeringly ahead of the Ford in points, my victory was yet to be set in stone. For someone who likes certainty, I was dead set on turning this possibility of victory into an undisputable win. On turn 12, I managed to take on the uphill corner better than the Ford, scoring the lead. Unfortunately, I was rather fearful on the uphill part of the track, giving the Ford more chances to fight back. To add more onto the pile, there were not much room to boost in this track, or so I thought. Going lap 3, I decided to go all in and boost in where I thought I was not supposed to. However, as I was confidently going around one corner towards the other, the Ford GT shoved me aside and reclaimed P1 in such a dirty manner. I would be lying to say that didn't piss me off. Not only that, but this has also caused me to overestimate the Charger's turning capacities again and was met with a guardrail. That altercation had me set back towards a second behind the Ford GT. Clearly, this was unacceptable. So I boosted my way uphill towards 12th corner, while remembering to slow down and anticipate the corner awaited on the top of the hill. Once I was done dealing with the final hairpin of the lap, I hammered down. The nitrous combined with the slipstream had allowed the Charger to almost hit 300 km an hour. On the 4th corner, I decided to pay the Ford back. However, I was not effective at handing out punishment, as the Ford was still able to come back from the attempt. With dying tires and a ravenous Ford GT to fend off, there was only so much I could do before succumbing to the Ford on the final corners. Frustrated, I tried wall riding, but it ended up in this. I might have lost to the Ford GT this time, but I refused to lose towards the C5R2. I boosted the Charger, caught up and overtook the Chevrolet just in time before the finish line. As a result, the distance between me and the Ford was exactly 10 points. Considering how finishing last still gives you 1 point, it's safe to say this tournament was as good as won. But I wanted to prove to myself and to you that I could beat that Ford GT without dirty tactics, at least in Laguna Seca. So, I jumped into the final round, still giving it my all, given how the fourth was starting from pole position. On the Andretti hairpin, I easily took the 2D's position. Its sibling, the 2J, didn't last long either. By the 6th corner, I had overtaken both the Viper and the Corvette. The challenge now was to catch that Ford and engage in a proper, honorable duel. This time, to deal with the Andretti hairpin, I used my experience both with this track and with the car to determine the correct braking point. This helped in properly slowing down for the corner without losing too much speed. With this level of effort, the 4th corner became deceptive. I had to slow down more than expected to avoid the car being plunged into the sand. To make up for this, I burned through my nitrous reserves. On the Rahal straight, I went like a bat out of hell just to keep up with the Ford GT. On a famous corkscrew, I felt I was one step away from knocking that crowd off the Ford. I tailed the White Racer down the rainy curve, refusing to let go all the way to the 11th corner, where I finally could make my move. Best lap and the ultimate overtake, all done without relying on punting or crushing the rival out, on the pure skill and car performance, blended into one harmonious unison, forming an effective weapon in taking down beasts. I remained vigilant throughout the rest of the race, kept up the winning pace, not allowing my guard to be lowered until I see that finish words in the middle of my screen. One error and there goes my victory. On the 4th lap, the Ford GT tried to disrupt me right before the corkscrew, but as I was going slow, that barely did anything. Juvenile tactics will not work against me this time. I refused to give that Ford his way again. On the final lap, my tires showed the first signs of wear and tear. That's where I decided to end the race as soon as possible, while my tires still can. And thankfully, that good drive around the corkscrew for the 5th time was a good sign that the tires still had a lot of fight left in them. Once I left the final corner, I hit the hammer down, completed nitrous burst, and claimed the final victory of the tournament, as well as the personal victory of beating the Ford GTLM fair and square. Gran Turismo gave me the Panos Esperante, a Le Mans prototype Tia car. This tournament might not give much in terms of cold hard cash, but that car, that is simply the most expensive piece of automotive brilliance I've ever gotten in this run by miles. Gran Turismo Spec II was a lot of fun. It took an already timeless game and elevated it to higher levels by tackling some of its glaring issues. One of them being the engine sounds sounding like vacuum cleaners, especially when you install fully customizable transmission. With how the wine volume can be adjusted and the engine sounds updated, the game felt that much better already. Honestly, the Dodge Charger's sound was heavenly. But what about you? Which car did you think has the best sound? Anyways, these are mainly why, going forward, I'll be doing challenge runs with this mod. If you think this was a good idea, let me know. If you prefer me to stick with a vanilla experience, also let me know in the comments. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this, why don't you watch how trying to beat Gran Turismo 4 with just Honda NSX ended? Before, I also tried to beat this game with just blue cars. Go check those out. I think you'll like them.